Good morning, Dan. How are you doing?
I'm doing amazing, Ryan. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I was just saying, just to kind of lay it out there for the audience, as I have followed you, you got introduced to a bunch of common mutual connections, and you have one hell of a background story that led you into entrepreneurship that I'd love to have you give the listeners an overview of. And then, there's a lot of stuff that you're doing in the SaaS business that you came out of your service-based business and why you're productizing things and scaling them. So there's a couple different avenues we can go with this, but why don't you lay the groundwork for us so that way we can dive in right into it?
Yeah. So I grew up in a family of 4 kids, second oldest. I've got a sister and 2 younger brothers, and we didn't grow up poor. I grew up in a challenging environment. My mom was an alcoholic. I didn't know this till later into my teens, but growing up in that kind of emotional, challenging, chaotic world. My dad was in sales, so he was gone quite a bit. An amazing dude. I share these stories. They're both alive today. They're incredibly important in my life. But the reality of it is that period of my life challenges and this shaped me into who I am today. But ended up getting taken out of my home at 11 years old, diagnosed with ADHD. What they would probably call oppositional defiance disorder, ODD today, which whatever, I had a temper. And things just kind of spiraled out of control when I was 13. Parents got divorced, ended up getting introduced to drugs, spending time with guys twice my age, learning stuff about life that I probably shouldn't have been learning. And, ended up in trouble with the law. Eventually I found myself in a stolen car, high and drunk, handgun in a bag sitting next to me, because I made a commitment to myself if the police stopped me, that I was going to pull the gun and let them do their job. And ended up, getting into a high-speed chase, trying to get away, smashed into a house. And when I went for the gun, it got stuck. And I kept pulling on it and pulling on it. Eventually the police came up to the yard and opened the door and grabbed me, and literally my feet didn't touch the ground, just dragged me across the front yard. And I woke up sober the next day in a jail cell, wondering what my life was going to look like. I was 16 at the time and ended up getting sentenced to prison for the severity of my crime. So adult prison. They had like a juvenile corner to this place. After 6 months, worked really hard to get out of there, prove myself. The judge and my caseworker allowed me to go to a rehab center called Portage, where I spent 11 months working on myself, like literally feeling management, sharing my story, rebuilding my confidence, building my self-worth, rebuilding the trust I'd lost with my family. And it was at the end of that program, 11 crazy hard months of internal work, that I was helping Rick, the maintenance guy, clean out one of the cabins on site. It was an old church camp. And in one of the rooms in the cabin was this old 486 computer and a yellow book on Java programming. And I just opened it up expecting it to be like Chinese, and it reads like English, right? If you ever looked at JavaScript, it's like if this, then that. And I thought, wow, that's cool. I've never touched a computer. But I ended up booting up the computer and following chapter 1 of this book, and I got the computer to say, "Hello world." So I thought I was a genius, man. That's the unfortunate part. It's not true, but it didn't matter. I literally got this computer to do what the book said. And I just felt like maybe I had a calling for computer programming. And what was funny is that became my new addiction, and my dad always said if I could just find something I was passionate about that wasn't illegal, that I'd do well in life. And then honestly, getting out of, Portage, going back to high school to graduate with honors and getting into computers there. So the high school I went to had a computer program. So I went all in. And, I've been fortunate enough since then to have built an incredible, I call it an empire. I've invested in 40 plus companies as an angel investor. 4 of them are $1 billion companies. I've built 5 tech companies myself. I've exited the last 3. I've raised venture capital for the last 2. I travel the world speaking on scaling and building software companies. And that's I run the largest YouTube channel in the world for software entrepreneurs. And that's my world, man. It all came from a moment as a 17-year-old trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And at the moment, my vision was just not go back to jail. I mean, it's a crazy ride.
Well, and I appreciate you giving the context, because I'll link out to your YouTube channel. And like you even said, because I can relate to, because I've been telling my own story for the last 7 years, and I want to get to some stuff that you kind of almost build on some of the other stuff that's out there, Dan. So you got this great interview with John Warlow from, 3 years ago. My dad was on the show. He's been on the show. And like, so if they want to go listen to the technical way about how you grew and sold that business, I want to kind of just touch on these and then build it forward. So you had talked about you had switched from services to software. So first of all, and I'll kind of plant a couple of seeds. You can go whatever direction you want. One is after learning a bunch of software and coding, why'd you get into services first? And then there's something that it was really interesting to me, Dan, is at the end of the episode, you're talking about life after, and this podcast used to be called Life After Business because I actually, when we sold, I called it Phantom Anxiety, and I went home, I cried. We sold the business, all this stuff. It was just crazy emotionally experienced. So I want to expand on why services, and then what was your experience reinventing yourself, because you did that in your childhood, and this is a way different version of kind of evolution. So why don't you kind of take either one of those?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, Ryan. I've had to evolve myself a few times, and I think that's one thing I pride myself on is I've gotten into different industries and succeeded, right? From services company with Spheric, and this is after two failed companies. The first two companies I started, Maritime Vacation and MB Host, did not succeed, right? I'm just lucky that I started when I was 17 and then again at 21. So by the time I was 24 and I started with Spheric, I had some entrepreneurial failures, which I feel like we all have. Just some people start when they're 9 and other people start when they're 38. So it just is what it is. But what happened with Spheric is on the services side is I was literally just trying to learn, almost like get paid to learn business. And I read my first business book when I was 23. It was called Love is a Killer App by Tim Sanders. I'd read a bunch of technical books, software books. I became a Microsoft certified solutions developer, like nerdy software architecture database stuff, but never occurred to me to read a business book until I was 23. I'm walking around in Ottawa, Canada, working as a consultant for our version of the FAA, NAV Canada. And this, something spoke to me about this book, and it wasn't even a book, it was a CD. So I bought it, listened to it, and it literally transformed my life around, consuming knowledge from my customers and being a good person, and your network is your net worth. And so Sphere came from just saying, okay, well, I want to be in business. I'm getting calls from recruiters for this technology that I'm specialized in called Plumtree Portals. And if I had a dozen people like me, I could literally retire. Like if those people worked for me and I had the relationships with the clients and, I knew the economics of my world, I literally could, that would be success. And that was the beginning of Spheric. And what was funny is while I was building that agency, even though I almost, screwed up 2 years into it, grew way too fast, didn't have the cash flow to make payroll, went into a depression, reached out, cold to a mentor that introduced me to 3 other people that became literally like to this day, folks I turn to for big life advice. That's where I started to build my own software. So I've always been good at building software. So at first, my first 2 companies for myself failed, thought maybe I should get paid to help other people. That built the capital. So, that company made me financially wealthy at 28 years old when I exited. But even before that, we were generating like, 600,000-700,000 in profit. I was 26, 27 years old. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I drove around in an 87 Jetta for a long time. And then eventually I think I got a 2001 Murano, right? Like
yeah.
Nobody knew. And I didn't care. It was literally, I looked at like the revenue and the capital is just almost opportunity to reinvest and to grow myself. And, that was that part of it. And afterwards, just, choosing to get into this world and I had tried to build a few software companies within Spheric, and anybody that has an agency has probably tried to do that. Any business owner probably at some point like build something for themselves and say, I remember meeting my buddy. He had, I'm not going to be too specific, but he had a manufacturing company, and he literally ran this like $13 million a year business off of Microsoft Access database on a network server. Yeah. And he was like, called me up one day. He's like, I think I could sell this to other people like me. And I'm like, dude, I can't believe your business is still running. Like you should be on something a little bit more horsepower.
It doesn't surprise me anymore, man, Dan.
Like they would. Did you guys do that? Like
no, I had this client where they're running a $65 million company off of an AS400 still.
like terminal green screen, like,
Yeah.
but it's like they would call each other to ask them to close down the file so they could go update a customer record. I mean, it's just, so I've always been software curious, but because I had those two failed starts, I lost a lot of confidence. So it wasn't until after, and I tried a few companies in Spheric, but I was distracted, and I had to shut those down, because the thing with agencies is if you're doing work that's making you money and you start this side hustle, especially with like some new hire, it's like their test project, and then it starts to get traction, but then you got a customer who's willing to pay you real money today, you just never give it the attention it needs.
I want to pull
Yeah.
that thread. So, and make sure that we come back. I got to kind of do this for my own, is about the kind of the emotional relationship you have with a business too. I want to come back to that, but the economics, Dan, this is where it's so interesting. You know, you talk in a couple of your other interviews about you almost went bankrupt, growth is fast. I've done a bunch of interviews where you talk about like growth is expensive. But then what's super interesting is there's this concept that we talk about with entrepreneurs is quit solving for annual income. If you're optimizing for your K1, distributions, perks, your salary, you're not necessarily optimizing the long-term value creation of your company. And then when you think about a SaaS business, where like if you're going to put the throttle down on capital, the economics from the cash and like what you can reinvest is way different than a service-based business. So kind of just walk through your overall thoughts on that, because it's so different.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the software world, essentially what you're creating is an annuity, right? No different than you would with an insurance product. If you're an insurance agent or like an investment vehicle, like you're essentially deferring the free cash flow today for the future value. So the reality of it is, if you can, like in venture-backed software world, you'll spend up to 16 months of value of a customer. So if they pay you $500 a month, you'll spend that times 16 to acquire a customer to pay you back after a year and a half of, finally producing some level of profit. And the reason why is the free cash flow component of it gets really interesting if you have a low churn, meaning the amount of customers that cancel every month. If you have a great expansion revenue, meaning that, the base of customers that start in January, if they end up spending more at the end of the year through proper pricing, value metrics, packaging, and plan structure. And then also just the overall value of the business. I had a coaching client that sold his company for 100 million. And, after the deal was done, he shared with, I have a private internal group of folks that are kind of like in that 10 to 15 million range. He shared that I left 20 million on the table by not building out the sales team and taking too much cash out of the business. Like I should have reinvested that back in. And the way he thinks about it, and I agree, it's every dollar you take out today is $7 into the future.
Yeah.
Right. And the reality though is most entrepreneurs just don't know how to reinvest capital efficiency. That's just, if you know how to do that, you're in the very few elite. Like most people they can't even run a business, let alone know how to properly reinvest, right? Most agencies, and one of my CFO is Greg Crabtree. He wrote a book called Simple Numbers. And he argues that, if you're kind of good, you'll do a third as a distribution, a third for taxes, and a third to invest in growth, right? And that's like a good kind of way to think about it if you're not in the software space. But if you do know how to, and one of the metrics that I would recommend people look at is return on equity. Like what's the return on equity, essentially cash left in the business. Most companies that aren't really that great are doing 50% ROE, right? And I mean, that means you're getting 50 cents on the dollar extra every year if you decide to kind of, keep the cash in the business to help support the economics. So most of my companies are a hell of a lot higher than that, which is awesome, because that's the beauty of the software world is they're incredibly cash efficient. They're just expensive if you don't know how to reduce your cost to acquire a customer. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's sort of, and it does, and it provides some context, Dan, because like, and I'm just totally riffing here, is I like, because I got so many years of trying to compile like what the heck is going on, like with my entrepreneur peers, what are the components that equal success? You got the psychological component. You just were, we were talking about a lot about the financial mechanics of this, and like understanding what creates value, how to efficiently deploy capital, and then you got the operational mechanics of how to use all these components correctly. You've been through a lot, these exits, you've been investing in these companies. And so you're gathering how the mental state of a business owner and their understanding, as well as the financial, economics of it. And then the business operational economics. I mean, it's just such a complicated thing. And you've gone through this if you were to go back to yourself before you sold the first business when you're 28, like where along the journey did you learn components of this where now you can sit down, you can invest in a company, you can assess this whole situation without really having to break it all down? And does that question make
I
sense?
mean, yeah, no, it makes sense because I remember one day in my early 20s, I was sitting in the park with my buddy Martin, and I was literally like, entrepreneurship is my sport. I do not watch team sports. I couldn't tell you anything about the news. I can't yeah, I'm the only Canadian that never played hockey. So my sport is business. And one day I'm sitting in this park in Toronto with my buddy Martin. He was in business as well, and there was this visualization, this vision of like business is essentially like a switchboard and knobs, right? Kind of like a mix board in a studio. And great business people know exactly what knobs to turn to get an outcome. And their hit rate is 100 out of 100, meaning that every move is effective. And I thought at that point in my early 20s, I'm probably at like 10, 10 out of 100. Like, yeah, but like, so it made me realize there's just this whole, and like each knob is different components of your business, from the go to
Mm-hmm.
market to the positioning to the finance to the capital structure to the team to the equity to the, like literally there's all these knobs, right? Because I'd been at that point, I'd read, couple dozen business books. I started to see patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say is I learned each one of the things that I know today just in time. So I call it just in case versus just in time. A lot of people consume information to learn about the potential future. I like to learn as I'm dealing with struggles and challenges
Mm-hmm.
today. So if I had to go back though, this is what I would do different. I would literally spend more time building a network of people that filled the gaps in lack of knowledge than try to learn it myself. Today, I'm able to move faster because I buy solutions. It's
Mm-hmm.
a who, not how. I think I was enamored for a long time about the mechanics of how things are done. And I think it's important for you to build a strategy that doesn't allow you to get taken advantage of. So, for example, I don't know anything about the legal component, or I say I don't, but I do just through osmosis doing so many deals. But I have a legal team and then I have a legal advisor. And as long as the legal team's proficient and then the legal advisor reviews their work, then I feel comfortable because I have two sets of eyes that are independent. And I feel like that when I say a methodology or a strategy to
Yeah.
avoid, that's what I'm talking about, right? Just like my controller, my CFO, and then the person that does the year ends, they're essentially different because I want checks and balances done. And I think that that's where I would have done things different is I would have spent more time because I learn best just by talking to people and challenging ideas and double clicking on things and being like, but well, how does this work? Whereas if I'm reading a book, it's kind of a one-way narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's consumption only. So I would have spent more time building that network because I didn't even understand the value of a true network of advisory boards, et cetera, until into my early 30s when I built my first venture backed company and built a board and built advisors and just saw the impact of getting advice at the right time from the right person literally transform a business outcome. Right? From I just before this call, I was on a call with one of my mentors in the training and coaching business, and he's doing 60 million a year. So arguably one of the top 0.1%,
Mm-hmm.
coaches in the world. And a question I had about their sales process literally just saved me probably a year of trial and error. That's the kind of, and it was a 3-minute question. It was like, here's what we're doing today. How do you guys do it? Oh, we do it this way. We use this tool and we do that. I'm like, oh my gosh, of course that's how you would do it. I don't know why it
Mm-hmm.
never occurred to me. But again, the guy's been doing it for 25 years. So having access to that caliber of person, that's what I would have changed going forward to teach me about the business side. But I'm most fascinated by entrepreneurs that actually don't know a lot about mechanics and they're just really good at vision and people, because I think that's where the real ROI is going to come from.
Describe that. What do you mean by that?
I think that the best leaders out there, the best visionaries, are ones that are able to hold that vision as a truth in their mind at 100% for as long as possible, and then breathe that future over the people that report to them and create a world where everybody on their team's goals fits inside their vision for their business. Like my rule for my life is my dreams have to be big enough for all my team's dreams to fit inside of. And if I don't do that, then why would they stay with me? Right. And if I don't communicate that, which everybody has another level, including myself, of how do I share the future, even though I see it in high fidelity, clarity, like again, it's the vision in my mind. So things like the vivid vision practice that Cameron Herold talks about, connecting the vision on a daily basis repeatedly to every leader that person you report to, and say, hey, the reason we're doing this work is to connect this thing because next year we're doing that, and then 3 years from now we're doing this, which is going to unlock this outcome, right? That ability to learn how to communicate that, the economy of words, the storytelling, the understanding their desires, and how do you take what they shared as a need, a want for their 5-year vision, and plug that into the business to unlock that opportunity for themselves. I think that is what business is really about. The mechanics, I could literally buy a restaurant tomorrow and have one of the most successful restaurants in the world. Not because I'm an egotistical maniac that thinks anything I do is touch gold, is because the process that I'm going to use to make success in the restaurant, the same one I use to build success in any business. And it's a proven process. Like, get around people that have done it before, reverse engineer what they're doing, build a good advisory board, hire great, get out of their way, empower them, communicate the vision for the restaurant, like ask yourselves what makes us different and unique, make sure there's a market for it, be competitive in the financial structure and the gross margin. Like, just to me, it's success leaves clues. And if we can surround ourselves with people that can teach us how to communicate that vision, how to become empathetic leaders, I think that those are the two things that took me a long time in business to really double down on.
So I'm going to ask you a question. I love the context. I want to dive further on how you're straddling multiple areas. And so, like, and this has come from my experience where, like, so because I've been the visionary, and I totally gravitate towards that role that you just talked about, right? And when it's your vision and you're bringing in people and you're designing a company, and especially if it's more software, you become like this artist and this individual that, if you haven't done this multiple times and exited, it becomes your identity. So, like, there's a couple things, and then I want to hear your thoughts. Is like, so one is, how do you keep that in a healthy relationship while you're doing that, getting people bought in and passionate, but also not sacrificing your soul to that vision? And then the second component, Dan, is hopefully the mechanics of that business that you're devoting your soul and all that to is growing value long term, and then making sure that you have enough of an understanding of the mechanics of the valuation of the business to know when and how to let it go into some other person, right? Like, it's really complicated to straddle all those worlds. I mean, how do you do it?
Well, lessons learned. So every mistake you can make in business, I've made probably 2 or 3 times. That's just 100% truth. And I can point to every one of them. You asked me earlier about, the kind of the post-exit vibe of, like, and the identity of, like, this is who I was. After I sold Spheric, I went into a depression. I was getting anxiety attacks. And this is coming from a person that was, personal development and positive mindset and gratitude. I mean, literally, 5-minute journal sitting next to me. I mean, this is not a plug, but everybody should buy one. Because it's just my daily practice. And I've been like that for a while. And so it just was so weird that here I was with more money than I ever seen in my bank account, not having to work, and getting anxiety attacks because, my therapist, and once I found one, because I didn't know what was going on, told me essentially I was having like almost like a father that lost a child. Like, I was having that same, I just didn't know it because I went from working 80, 100 hours a week, having this big team dependent on me and my identity wrapped around this company, to waking up and literally nobody cared if I got out of bed. So 0 drive, 0 purpose. Yeah, I went out and bought a big house and a hot tub and a wakeboarding boat at 28 and thought I was set. But it turns out that wasn't, humans need purpose and they need meaning. And, you could literally, people think it's about the money, but if I gave you $10 million and told you to sit under the stairs in a closet, you're still you.
You're right.
It's not about the money, right?
Yeah.
And it's not even about the things the money buy. And look, and I drive a supercar. Like, I totally love cool shit. Like, I get the benefits of having money, but I also know that it's the people that you get to share it in the memories, right? We don't get this time back. Like this moment is mine. You and I sharing this time, that is the only thing I've got. It's unique to me and us, and everything else is kind of borrowed. Our bodies are borrowed. Our stuff is like, once we're gone, it gets put back into the world, and whoever gets whatever they get. So what I've discovered to help me with the identity side is I've disconnected my self-worth to the things that I've created, right? Like, this is, there's this great guy called Peter Crone, that is a mentor of mine, right? And he did an incredible interview with a guy named Ed Milet. So if you guys want, find the
Hmm.
podcast interview with Ed Milet and Peter Crone, and you'll understand it. But he talks about, like, like, who do you think you are? And you say, well, this is who I am. I'm an Iron Man. I'm a software entrepreneur. I'm a father of two. I'm passionate about my community, all things. And he says, well, if I, like, cut the back of your neck open and open up, am I going to find a tag that says this is what you are? Right? Like, there's no tag that says you're, you're anything. Like, if I grew up in Spain, I'd be Spanish, not English. Like, even that component, you got to understand, is that we're a byproduct of our environment. So the truth is the things we create does not make our identity. And if you take those things away and you live by that, like, the cool part for me, I'm at a point in my journey where it's I call it blissfully dissatisfied, right? And I got that from Ed. Like, I am incredibly grateful and content with what I have, and I don't approach my day with lack, but at the same time, I know there's more for me to create, and there's more for me to discover. And that is what I will hinge my drive on, not the specific outcomes, right? I'm
Yep.
competing against me from yesterday and the possibility of who I could be, right? And I just believe that there's greatness in every human being, period, including myself. And my job is to figure out how to express that as best possible. So I look at money and building companies is almost like an opportunity to continue to build the gym of training for perfect practice around the possibility of who I can become. And then at the same time, I'm not an idiot. Like, some of my I shouldn't say I'm not an idiot. Some of my friends who are they're literally financially like, on paper they're wealthy, and in their lives they're poor,
Yeah, totally
right?
agree.
And they
Yep.
take pride with, mowing their own lawn, and being the first one in at work and the last one to leave, and they do all these things under the guise of hard work, and then their wives like, you're never home, and their kids are like, you don't have time for me. They feel like their friends are like, you're not even a good friend, you never call me. And I just think that that's so crazy. On the flip side is that once you accumulate some level of wealth, you need to learn how to redistribute it into your life to allow you to do more. And that's like what I'm really good at. I'm good at looking at my calendar and deploying capital to buy back my time, not because I think I'm better than anybody else and I can't do the work, only because I know where my genius lies for me. And I want to spend as much time as I can in those zones of genius, not in the zone of work,
Hmm.
right? And the old saying that my dad used to say to me as a kid, which was, find something you love to do and you'll never work a day in the life. Dude, it's so true, but you can't appreciate it until you don't. Like, until you don't have to work, you don't understand. Like, there's people that come to me and they go like, I wish I could wake up excited to do the thing I'm about to do. I don't know what that's not like to feel like. I haven't woken up and not been excited about my day in probably 15 years. Like, I can't think of a day where I laid in bed and said, man, I really don't want to get up. Like, I just literally, it was just this iteration, evolved process to get to a point where I've designed my life to include incredible work. And dude, I'm the guy that wakes up at 4 a.m. I'll work harder than anybody else in the room, but I'm also the person that gets the most out of their life. Like, I literally go snow biking, cat skiing, heli skiing on Sunday, wake surfing, mountain biking. I work out sometimes twice a day. Like, I'm all in all aspects of life. And to me, that's, if you want to call it identity, that's my identity, not the businesses anymore. Because I did make that mistake when I sold Sphere. I was spheric, and that identity hurt me. And then I've taken that learning and said, look, the businesses I build are not me and their creations. And if they work out, great. And if they don't, I'm here to learn. I learned a lot when things don't work out.
And I think it's interesting is you can take that concept of buying back your time, right? So your calendar is probably invested. You got investments, you got current businesses and coaching, all this other stuff that you're doing. So your business or your calendar is full of a bunch of stuff. But if a listener's in here, they own a business and they're stuck in it. And so here, I'll give you kind of some foundation you can build on. It is this annual income versus the long-term value creation, right? If you don't understand normalized EBITDA and like you're investing the cash flow, that third or maybe more back into the business, what's going to be the return? Like you have a job, you have a salary, you get paid for that salary. Even if it's 400 grand as a CEO, I can find another person if I go recruit and I've got the capital, right? Like you don't have to do that. You should be allocating resources on the top of the cash flow mountain. So if you have someone that's sitting there and they're stuck because they're, solving for annual income, having, that shift in mindset, when you're looking at a business, like a machine like that, Dan, like how do you start, like any exercise that you have of like people identifying like, okay, how do I invest in the business to buy back my time in the business to get on top of that cash flow?
So this is the nuance. Okay. I read the E-Myth. Michael Gerber, incredible. I had the privilege of sitting down, having dinner with him a few years ago. That book transformed my life. It taught me about systems and procedures and the franchise prototype concept. And then I read like Sam Carpenter's book, Work the System, and the Checklist Manifesto, and, everything from like how to delegate to productivity and all. And the missing crux for me that I learned a decade ago that shifted everything, and it's the number one thing, if I sit down with an entrepreneur, I won't talk about anything else other than this concept, the buyback principle.
I love it.
It's the unlock. And the way it works is you have to look at revenue and capital from your business as opportunity to buy time out of your calendar. Most people make the mistake of using that money to hire somebody to grow capacity, right? I need another customer support person. I need another person, frontline worker. I need another consultant. I need another developer. Or you could say, in my calendar, where am I spending time? Let me build these buckets of focus and value, like stack them, saying like, I could pay somebody $15 an hour to do this group of stuff, or $40 an hour or whatever, and literally look at the biggest swath of things that doesn't cost a lot that somebody else can do. Now, as soon as I say that, people are going to go, yeah, but what, accounts receivable. What if I give it to somebody else and they don't do it right? That's a leadership problem. Okay. But for you to think that a CEO of a $500,000 a year should be spending time on accounts receivable, that's just ridiculous. Like you can hire some, and some people will spend, I remember recently a client was thinking of hiring a COO. Okay. $250,000 a year hire, like a big hire. Right. And I go, what are you spending your time on that you need to hire a COO to free up? And he goes, I spend probably 60% of my week producing these very advanced proposal designs for sales. And I go, what would it cost you to hire somebody per hour to do that work? And he goes, probably like $35 an hour. I'll tell you, dude, that hire is cheaper than a COO, right? And guess what? He didn't need a COO because as soon as he got that 60% of his time back, he took 20% and did the COO function he should have been doing that he wasn't. And all of a sudden he's golfing more, right? Like that's the idea, is if you get capacity as a byproduct of hiring back from your calendar, then that's a benefit. But the reason why is because if you don't, usually at about 1.3 million in revenue and about a dozen employees, plus or minus 5-10%, you will end up where you'll wake up, you'll work your butt off, and at the end of the day, you'll look and feel like you didn't do anything. And the reason why is because you spent all your time managing people, telling them what to do, check they got done, and tell them what to do next, versus hiring people to buy back your time so that your time is spent in your zone of genius, where there's no, if I look at a calendar and I say, okay, highlight everything that's green that brings you energy and everything that takes energy from you is red. If it's 50-50 today, let's get it to 90-10. Let's get it to 100%. I promise you, Ryan, my calendar is 100% green. And if somehow some sneaky little beaky thing snuck on there because Allie, my assistant, who owns my calendar, it's one conversation. It doesn't happen for the rest of my life. It's, hey, those kind of things are not for me to do. This person should deal with it. And going forward, please make sure it doesn't end up in my calendar. And that allows me to scale infinitely, because I never feel like I'm being energy sucked. I never feel like I'm doing anything that isn't in my zone of genius. And if as that shifts, as I've kind of scaled, going from, being a self-employed to a business owner to being an investor to now building an empire of companies with CEOs that report to me, like, and at any point, the cool part, right? At any point, I can decide I don't want to do this anymore. And like you said, hire the person. This is the new Dan. You guys report to him.
Yeah.
I'm gone for 3 years with my family. We're traveling the world, and the business will continue to grow because I've hired people to do the functions that seem critical, but that really aren't. And so it's a big mindset shift. It's just people don't value their time. They don't. If I get like the other thing, Ryan, if I magically said tomorrow you've got the whole day back, tomorrow you just like whatever you had planned to do is not needed. You've had the whole day. Most entrepreneurs wouldn't even know what to do with their time. And that's the reality.
Isn't that crazy? Dude, you just nailed it. And like, so because what I've noticed, Dan, is people don't know what creates value, what creates leverage. So like, if you think about like almost like the domino, if you take like almost like AI, if you push an algorithm, you're just going to get more of what you put into it, right? So we have 168 hours a week, right? Period. You do, I do. We just got to figure out where we want to. Hopefully, you enjoy it, and hopefully, whatever you're doing is creating economic value in the wake, right? So if you push through 168 hours of what you just described, where are you putting your time? Well, is it going into a business that's going to be worth a 1 multiple or a 10x MRR, right? And so like you start to like, you look at these ways of the mechanics of like, okay, I'm going to put the throttle down on my time, which is the first constraint. Then it's the value that's being created after that. And hopefully, when and how to trade that asset, which is just a business, to make sure that your people and the thing that you built is going to pass on to the person that's going to take care of it based on the things that you've aligned with. There's this
if you just think of that, I mean, there's two things on that. If, the time component, if you just think of enterprise value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the business being valuable. If you are the single person that knows how it runs and you have a 1,000 little
minions,
worker bees, right? Then there's no value there. So like just even not only is it better for your mental health, but better for the business to use the buyback principle strategy that I teach, because it inherently will create a business that's valuable because it's not going to be dependent on you, right? The in regards to choosing where you should spend that free time, if you happen to buy it back, as you've kind of alluded to a few times, we want to figure out what the market values, right? So I remember, and there's value drivers and value detractors.
Mm-hmm.
And a while ago, one of my friends, I was asking him, I was like, what's your plan? Like you've got this thing, I think it was at 3 million in revenue. And, he's in the real estate space. He goes, my plan is to build it up to 10 and then sell it. And I said, that's amazing. I said, who do you know that's built a company like yours that's actually sold it? And he's like, I don't know anybody. Now that I think of it, I don't know anybody. I said, well, do you know what kind of companies would buy it? And he's like, I don't know. Like I just assume there's companies out there that'll buy my company. I said, well, here's the reality. You're going to spend the next, he was saying 7 years to go from 3 to 10 building this business. Okay. So you're going to wake up every day and you're going to try to create value. You're going to try to trade time for money and be more efficient. And it's possible that you go and do all of this effort to end up at the end of the day, successful at the 10 million, building this thing, to find out that when you go to sell it, it has no value to the market. Or worse, the way you set it up. It could be the contracts, your employment agreements, your IP structure, whatever it is a value detractor, meaning you think it's worth X, but it's actually worth less because you didn't know what the market rewarded. And had you known that 7 years ago, you could have set up the steps in the business, those things, those contracts, the agreements, the pricing structure, the length of terms of contract, whatever, to be valuable. And all you have to do today is ask. You could literally go to an M&A bank, to a business broker, to your accountant, to a lawyer, to say, hey, in these kind of transactions, what are the value drivers that are used to increase the valuation? And then you've got 7 years of essentially a hit list of focus of strategy to go execute against. I mean, that is more tactical, but that's where if you figure out how to do the buyback principle properly, that free time should be invested there. And that's kind of what you've been saying. It's like, that is the role of the CEO.
Well, and it's so crazy. It's like, in literally, so I'm on a 7-year journey since we sold the business, Dan. So, 5 years into the podcast, used to be called Life After, started talking about exits and like visceral reactions from entrepreneurs in Vistage and EO and all my CEO peer groups. And I'm like, no, guys and gals, like it's not about selling today. It's about doing what you just described. And it's just this insane inertia do you have to overcome to say, like, unless you understand how value is created, like, hey, this is enterprise, equity value, net proceeds, like deals, like, unless you know this stuff, how in God's name can you play the right game? And I'm just like you, or like, this is my sport. So like, I just go, can you imagine walking onto a football field thinking you're playing soccer? like,
That's a good analogy.
Like, what are the rules of the game? Like, you have to know them to actually strategize. There's going to be an outcome. There's a lot of different ways the plays can unfold. And again, this is coming from a guy that's not a sports guy, right? Like, but the analogy is very legit. And you go like, how, like, to intentionally grow value, you have to understand it. And it's amazing how few people that are founders who didn't come from an Ivy League finance degree understand this stuff. And I'm just like, it's like the zeros and the ones in the matrix. You're like, dude, if you don't understand this, you're only going to hope. And you wake up and it's just like 90% of the people where they sell, and they go, I just never knew that all of my time, money, and energy was wasted for the last 15 years. I mean, how do you get over that pushback that you hear from people? Maybe you don't get it in the SaaS space as much, but like, oh, it's not about selling. This is about like, it's all like the ridiculous chants people have been telling themselves for decades. How do you, like, what is your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think because of the nature of my world, the idea of exiting is kind of almost part of the conversation day one. But what's lacking is what, in that software space is understanding the game, right? When you said, imagine that you think you're playing soccer and you walk onto a football field. Like, most people think in software, it's like, I just need to get customers, right? But the truth is there's two metrics that matter. There's the churn. So how many customers do you keep over what period of time? That's going to set your lifetime value. And then the other one is expansion revenue, which is how much money does a customer make you when they start versus, a year later for that cohort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can focus on those two things as first principles for growing the business, right? Not purely on selling. And it's romantic to want to learn growth hacks and marketing tactics and have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people use your product. I get it. But if doing that is taking away from building an efficient model, which is around retention and expansion, then you're, to me, I always look at it as like right time, right action, right? One of my mentors, Eric Ries, used to say that. He was the author of The Lean Startup. And, it's kind of like, and my other friend, Todd Herman, he says, sequencing equals success. And if I've got a recipe, or I've got ingredients to make, a cake, and, and this is the thing with most entrepreneurs, they have good ideas, right? So I have a list of good ideas, and one entrepreneur executes it in one sequence, the other executes it in a reverse sequence, one wins, the other one loses. So it's not about the good ideas. It's not about the ingredients. It's literally about the recipe. It's understanding, what do I do this year, this quarter, and what do I do next year or next quarter, and prioritizing it to be able to maximize the benefit, right? That to me is strategy. And that is what most entrepreneurs that are, as Gerber calls them, technicians that have an entrepreneurial seizure, that's what they're missing. They're missing this whole swath of knowledge and questioning, which I would argue Keith Cunningham has the best stuff on this. So Keith, The Road Less Stupid. Keith would be like, if I had to take, like, I didn't really grow up with a grandfather. He passed away when I was very young, but like Keith would be on, I'd merge a bunch of cool people and Keith would be on that list. Cause it's just sage strategic thinking, right? Like, and I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs don't give themselves permission to do, is just to stop doing, to start thinking about the sequence of activities and how those are going to impact, and what would, and just play out what would be different if I changed the priorities and tried this approach. Maybe that'll yield a better outcome. But it all goes back to understanding the value drivers of the business. because if you don't know that, then you don't know what game you're playing. So you think you scored and you actually scored against yourself, right?
Well, and totally. And I think about like the sequence of events too. So Todd Herman's been on the show and we're talking about the imposter syndrome, and he gave me some insanely very critical pushback right in the spot, which I loved. And there's this mindset shift that you have to have first. I think, and I don't know how you operate in your sequence of events, Dan, but like if I know why things happen, then I can go deep into something, and it gives me the ability to overcome all the BS or challenges with trying to figure that information out, because I understand like the purpose of that. Like, but the mindset shift has to happen first, right? Like you have to understand, like you have to give yourself permission, like you said. So like, is there things that you've seen where people like can't even get to that mindset shift, or like what are some of the biggest barriers to people getting
Oh
the right
man.
sequence?
I mean, I could talk about my clients, but I think my own journey is just polluted with that, right? Like one of the questions I ask myself on a daily basis is, for whatever goals I want to achieve, who do I need to become to achieve that goal? Like, who do I need to become? It's like this conversation I have with myself in the mirror. It's like, here's where I'm at, here's where I want to go. The person I am today is not going to be able to achieve that, because if I was, then I would have it already, right? Like outcomes are 100% a byproduct of you, your mindset, your decisions, your prioritization, your strategies, your confidence, your all this stuff. So skill set, there's things that you don't know, relationships. And from a mindset point of view, there's different levels where you hit these barriers, right? So like starting off in business, I didn't even know that it made sense to have a team. So my first two companies failed because it was just me and contractors once in a while to do a design to help me with a little bit of code. But there was never even a thought of like building a team. Like it just didn't occur to me for almost a decade. And then even when I started my third company, I realized I needed people to do work, but I didn't realize I needed people to help me with the management and the strategy, the reporting, and the measurement side of things, right? And so there's always these mindset challenges
Mm-hmm.
around either personal worth or imposter syndrome or confidence. I know that I lacked. I mean, going into my third company, I was so afraid to fail. My dad begged me, like, could you just get a normal job? Like, I think you've proven yourself, like, you've done this long enough, like, maybe, and I was just like, and that was coming from a dad who, I just thought as long as I wasn't in trouble with the law, he'd be proud of me. And he was now giving me a hard time. I thought, geez, must be really bad. And, going through that journey of self reflection, and it never stops. I think it's Gay Hendrickson wrote an incredible book called Big Leap. And it's just this concept of humans have these upper limiting beliefs. And if you're not even aware you have them, that's number one. It's like, understand that you have them. Like it's very simple, like it shows up in your life on the scale. Like, what do
Mm-hmm.
you weigh? Right. And when you get to a certain weight, you might have come back from vacation, you put on extra 5 pounds, boom, 2 weeks of fitness and healthy decisions, and you get back down, right? Or your bank account, and maybe it's like, okay, I need to have $5,000 in my savings account, and if that goes to 3, you stop spending and you save it until it's to 5, right? But if it goes to 8, you get
Spend.
excited on the
Yeah.
weekend and you spend. So like what happens is we have these thermostats that we set in our lives that we don't even know are there. And like a thermostat, if the room gets hot, it will cool it down. So understanding, these upper limiting beliefs exist, our jobs, I think, is to ask ourselves, how do I make the old high the new low? So that's the work I do with my coaching clients on the mindset side. It's, what do you like? Because I had a client once, they go, what do I do now? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, my goal was $1 million a month. That was like the craziest goal when he started his business 15 years prior. Like if I ever made $1 million a month, that would just be like mind blowing. And here he is making like 1.2 million. And it took all the air out of his tires, all the motivation, because that was his upper limit. And now
Mm-hmm.
that he hit it, he was dragging his feet to work, and he was delaying replying to potential customers, and he just wasn't into it. And I said, our job is for you to realize that's your new floor, man. Like that's not the upper limit. That's not exciting. Let's reset it. Let's redesign it. Let's have a different perspective. And the best way to heat up, or change the dynamics of your thermostat is to get around a peer group that play at a bigger level. Right. And that's why for me in my coaching, a component of that coaching is 3 times a year. those groups of people get together to be inspired, to be shown examples of greatness, to be taught what it looks like to be world class and excellence. And I just think that to me is like the mindset game that we're playing. It's how do I be aware that I have these upper limiting beliefs, and who are the people and circumstances and environments that I need to get into to really elevate that, make it the old high, the new low.
It's so interesting because when you look at an entrepreneur, you can look at their business as their thermostat. Like you're talking about the bank account or the weight.
100%.
And you just go, I get it. Here's the individual, here's their knowledge base, here's the mind, here's their mindset. And then you look at their business and you go, there's like a direct correlation
Ryan,
between
this is the cool part. And I would love an accountant to let me analyze their books, but I think it's 300K, about 2 million.
Revenue,
so
EBITDA,
300K
or MR,
yeah,
what are you talking
top line revenue, 300K, 2 million, and then 10 million. And the reason why those breaks exist is because you need to learn a new skill set.
Mm-hmm.
So at 300,000, you can be a sole contributor, dentist, blah, blah, blah. If you don't learn how to delegate, that's your upper limit. Once you do that, 1 to 2 million is your upper limit because you're only good enough to delegate to people that do the work.
Yep.
To go from 2 to 10, you need to learn how to work with a team that works with the team to deliver the value.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Dan, because you could even actually look at the numbers to be able to say, because like in the second part where you're the 1 to 2 million, you have to reinvest, you have to learn finance and strategy to reinvest to get to the next level. And so many times the lifestyle creep that goes from the salary into the distributions, pulling money out, they have no idea what they would do with the additional money or time, to your point, right? We're getting short of time here. So 2 final questions for you. One is, what does the word intentional mean for you?
To me, intentional is deliberate about where I spend my time. So literally, if you want to see my priorities, you look at my calendar, you'll know very clearly what is important to me.
And I'm a minute over. So the second question is, what's the best place for everybody to get in touch with you?
Instagram is the reality show. If you want to see behind the scenes of my life, go to my Instagram stories where I share the behind the scenes. LinkedIn is where I share the business strategies on growth, my how-to content on YouTube, my newsletters where I kind of share internal customer case studies, that kind of stuff. You guys are interested in kind of following the journey, but I'm all over. Dan Martell, 2 L's of Martell, my .com, all social media accounts. If I can be helpful, reach out. I'd love to serve.
Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Ryan, absolutely my pleasure, man. Great meeting you.